on October 15th to talk about political reform and campaign reform issues, and on March 26th...
We'll leave this discussion at this point. You can see it in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. The U.S. Senate is about to gavel in this morning for general speeches before lawmakers turn to a judicial nomination at 11:15. A vote on the nominations expected about 11:45. The chamber will take a break for party lunches, as they usually do on Tuesday between 12:30 and 2:15 Eastern. And then they'll return to work on the temporary federal spending bill known as the CR. The first vote on that measure, by the way, is expected tomorrow. And now live to the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Let us pray. Eternal Spirit, supreme source of light and love, as the American people experience jitters because of an impending government shutdown, we look to you, the fountain of wisdom. Give our senators the wisdom to know what is right and the courage to do it. Lord, thank you for the doors you open to us, providing us with opportunities to accomplish your purposes. Open for our lawmakers new and wide horizons, leading them to ever-increasing usefulness. Give them the backbone to go through the doors you open, setting aside fears that intimidate and discourage as they seek to obey your commands. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., September 24, 2013. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Edward J. Markey, a senator from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
The Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to count number 195, which is the continuing resolution.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, moves to proceed to H.J. Res. 59, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, following my remarks and those of the Republican leader, there will be a freedom morning business until 11:15 this morning. The Republicans will control the first half, majority the second half. At 11:15, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the nomination of Todd Hughes to be United States Circuit Judge for the Federal Circuit. At 11:45, there will be a roll call vote on that confirmation. Following that vote, the Senate will recess until 2:15 to allow for weekly caucus meetings. At 2:15, we'll resume consideration of the continuing resolution. Senator Mikulski will make opening remarks at that time, and Senator Cruz will be recognized after her. Now, Mr. President, on the morning news, I hear that there's a filibuster today. I want to disabuse everyone. There will be no filibuster today. Filibusters to stop people from voting, and we are going to vote tomorrow. Under the rules, no one can stop that. We can advance the time and do it more quickly, and we could do that at any time, and I'd be happy to make sure that we accomplish that if both sides agree that, in fact, is something we should do. But we're going to vote tomorrow, regardless of what anyone says or does today, unless it's a consent agreement to collapse the time. And that vote will occur sometime around noon tomorrow. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands there is no filibuster today. Mr. President, for millions of American families, the road to economic recovery has been long, long, and very, very hard. And now, just as the economy begins to gain steam, some Republicans in Congress seem determined to derail 4 years of progress. They're obsessed with defunding health care. They're pushing us closer and closer to a government shutdown that would tank the economy, and that's an understatement. The business community is gravely concerned about the impacts of a shutdown on the economy, and middle-class Americans are really upset and concerned about the threat of this. Yesterday, Republican and Democratic leaders in both houses of Congress received a letter from the Business Roundtable, an association of chief executive officers that employ more than 16 million people. It's respected by Democrats and Republicans. The CEOs cautioned us about the economic dangers of a government shutdown, and they warned of the catastrophic effects of a first-ever default on the nation's debt, the next looming crisis Republicans hope to exploit to their own short-term political benefit. I should say, some Republicans. This is what the Business Roundtable wrote yesterday, and I quote, "Failure to fund the basic business of government and adjust the debt limit in a fiscally responsible manner would risk both the immediate and long-term health of the United States economy. Even a brief government shutdown would have serious economic consequences, and default, however temporary, would be calamitous." That's what they said, Mr. President. 5 years removed from the worst of the Great Recession, job creation, economic growth, and other key economic indicators are not where they should be, but they're headed in the right direction. The private sector has created 7.5 million jobs in the last 42 months. Jobless claims are at a 5-year low, and consumers feel more optimistic about the economy than they have at any point in the last 5 years. A government shutdown would reverse these trends and stunt future economic growth, and it would panic consumers and financial institutions, and it would cost the economy more than $30 billion for every week the government remains shuttered. Each week, $30 billion. We know this from experience. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the shutdowns in the mid-90s, which lasted 27 days all told, reduced GDP by 0.5%. Mr. President, that's huge, huge amounts of damage to our economy. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has joined the Business Roundtable in calling on Congress to keep the government open. Here's what they said. Quote, "It is not in the best interest of the U.S. business community or the American people to risk even a brief government shutdown that might trigger disruptive consequences or raise new policy uncertainties washing over the U.S. economy. But the dire effects of a shutdown wouldn't just impact the economy. A shutdown would send half of the Defense Department civilian workforce home without pay and delay paychecks for many military families that already live paycheck to paycheck. Although checks would go out to seniors already on Social Security, no new applications for benefits would be processed, putting seniors and disabled Americans at risk. Likewise, veterans applying for education, disability, and pension benefits would be forced to wait. The Centers for Disease Control, Mr. President, would stop monitoring disease outbreaks, and passport applications would languish, costing airlines and travel-related business millions of dollars. By a 3-to-1 margin, Americans already opposed the senseless Republican plan to hold, I should say, Mr. President, let me say this right. By a margin of 3-to-1, all Americans recognize that the plan is senseless. Some feel more strongly than others. This senseless plan to hold the government hostage to defund Obamacare. Mr. President, as I said here yesterday morning, CNN, CNBC, separate polling show 59, same number in both polls, 59% of the American people support Obamacare. And even a larger number of people think the government shutdown is the worst idea that ever came along. As one Republican senator said, the dumbest idea you ever heard. So imagine, Mr. President, their reaction, the American public, once they see the dark economic outcome of a shutdown. I've told you how they feel, but they can see in their mind's eye they're losing their jobs, their families losing jobs, and unquestioned economic downturn. Confucius, famous Chinese philosopher, offered a warning a long time ago, Mr. President, when he said, and I quote, "When anger rises, think of the consequences." I realize generally the Republicans are still upset, mad, angry that they lost the election in 2008. I understand that. They're still angry that they failed to stop a landmark expansion of health care to millions of Americans. I understand that. They're angry that they have failed to regain control of the Senate. And they're angry that President Obama was overwhelmingly reelected last year. But it's time to set that anger aside. It's time to stop obsessing over old battles and think of the consequences of a government shutdown. So, Mr. President, we need to do, the presiding officer, longtime member of Congress, approaching 4 decades of being in Congress, recognizing how we've worked together over those decades, accomplishing good things for this country. We need to go back to those days of working together. We could start many places. We could start by funding the government without a big hassle. We could work together to do postal reform, which affects 6 million working Americans. We could work together to do ag reform, agricultural reform, which under the bill that we passed out of this body, we save $23 billion, cut the deficit by $23 billion. We could work together to pass immigration reform. My Republican colleagues are concerned about the debt. That reduces it by $8 trillion. Mr. President, the American people at least deserve this, that we work together to get things done. And I would hope that with this crisis facing us, we can put all our obsessions about health care and Obama getting reelected and our still controlling the Senate behind us and move on, Mr. President, to do good things for our country again.
Mr. President.
Republican leader.
About 4 years ago, I mounted a campaign right here on the Senate floor against a bill that would come to be known as Obamacare. Nearly every day we were in session, I spoke about the dangers of this bill for individuals, for families, for businesses, and the very character of our country. I predicted it would be a complete disaster and that anyone who voted for it would come to regret it, because the promises that were being made about Obamacare couldn't possibly be kept. And guess what happened? These predictions are all coming true. Obamacare hasn't even been fully implemented yet, but we can already see the train wreck headed our way. Premiums are skyrocketing. Major companies have been dropping the health care plans their employees have and like. And every week it seems there are new reports about glitches that will hurt families, compromise personal information, or expose the American people to fraud. All of which helps explain why even some of the bill's fiercest early backers are looking for an escape hatch. But there's only one escape hatch that will fully help those trapped by this law, and that's full repeal. And that's why I'm supporting the House-passed CR. Not only does it defund this terrible law, it doesn't increase government spending by a penny, and it keeps the government from shutting down, which nobody wants. And it does something else, and this is really important. It puts the focus right where it belongs on the Democrats who voted for and continue to support Obamacare. Because once we invoke cloture, Mr. President, the focus will then turn to our friends on the other side of the aisle, the Senate Democrats. The Majority Leader is counting on his Democratic allies to amend the bill. He can only afford to lose 4 Democrats, just 4, if he wants to restore funding for Obamacare. So if 5 Senate Democrats vote against the Majority Leader, Obamacare will be defunded. That, Mr. President, is a vote we should have, and in all likelihood will have. Democrats have been hearing the same complaints about Obamacare that the rest of us have. The spotlight really should be on them. This is a rare opportunity to defund the law with a simple majority to defund Obamacare. We should have that vote. It just doesn't happen. I just don't happen to think filibustering a bill that defunds Obamacare is the best route to defunding Obamacare. All it does is shut down the government and keep Obamacare funded, and none of us want that. That would be the results of filibustering. 4 years ago, every Democrat voted for this bill and had the excuse that they didn't know how it would turn out. Well, they don't have that excuse now. I think we deserve to know where they stand now. 4 years ago, every Senate Democrat worked to jam this bill through the Senate over the loud objections of their constituents, and the implementation of this law proceeds. Their constituents remain just as angry about it, and it's important for their senators to go on record once again. We're giving them a do-over, a second chance, if you will. Do they stand with the people of their states who do not want this law to be implemented, or do they double down on this failed experiment? That's the question. Everybody knows where Republicans stand on this issue. We may be divided on some things. We may not always agree on tactics. But on the question of repealing Obamacare, we're totally united. This law should be defunded. That's what the House bill does. That's why I plan to support it. But if we're going to repeal Obamacare, we're going to need some Democratic votes to do it. That's the only plan I've seen in this debate that will actually get us to our common goal of undoing the law. For the sake of our constituents, we need to unite to achieve it. So this morning I'd like to make a plea to our friends on the other side. Join us in taking it off the books and replacing it with the kind of common sense step-by-step reforms that lower costs and that Americans will actually embrace. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 11:15 a.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first half.
President.
The Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I'm going to ask unanimous consent to speak, though the minority has the first half, and ask the 10 minutes that I speak be taken off the majority time at the end of morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I listened closely to the statement made by Senator McConnell of Kentucky, the Republican Senate leader, and I applaud him and other senators who have spoken out against the so-called filibuster that's been initiated by the senator from Texas and at least one other senator. It is not technically a filibuster, as Senator Reid has said, but the object is to slow down the business of the Senate, and that it is similar to a filibuster. We are going to have that occur today when Senator Cruz takes the floor this afternoon to state his position that we should shut down the government if we do not fund Obamacare, or if we fund Obamacare. And that, to me, is an irresponsible position. It is irresponsible because the senators who support the House position are playing high-stakes poker with other people's money. To shut down the government is disastrous, not only for hundreds of thousands of federal employees who do important work to keep America safe and to keep us a leading nation in the economy, but also because it's at the expense of American jobs. When Senator Reid, the Democratic leader, came to the floor and read a statement from the Business Roundtable, he was reading from the strongest business group that usually, without fail, supports Republicans. That group put out a statement yesterday, the Business Roundtable, the leading business executives in our country, that to shut down the government or to fail to extend the debt ceiling is devastating to our economy. The words they used were calamitous and catastrophic. That is how they described the Republican strategy which Senator Cruz and others are bringing to the floor of the Senate today. Catastrophic, calamitous. Why in the world would we have this self-imposed crisis created by the threats of the House Republicans on the floor of the Senate today? Well, they're entitled to a debate. They're entitled to state their position. That's their right as senators representing their states. But they're not entitled to damage our economy and hurt innocent people and shut down the government. That is a petulant political position. What we need to do is take a more positive approach to governing this country. Senator McConnell also talked about Obamacare, known as the health care reform bill. One of the most important bills the Senate's passed in modern times, and one that I was proud to support. And what he is basically calling for is the repeal of Obamacare. What the Republicans are calling for is to repeal, for example, that provision in Obamacare which says that health insurance companies cannot discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. If you happen to be in a family with a child who has diabetes, it may be impossible for you to buy health insurance under the old law. Under Obamacare, your family cannot be discriminated against. The Republicans want to eliminate that provision of Obamacare when they call for abolishing that program. Secondly, when you defund and eliminate Obamacare, you're going to change that provision which guarantees there will be no limits on your health insurance policy coverage. Who knows what tomorrow's diagnosis will bring, what bills it will bring to your family. But some health insurance policies have a limit on what they pay, and when that limit is reached, people face bankruptcy and worse. Obamacare stops that from happening. The Republicans want to repeal that. Obamacare also says that if your young son or daughter, fresh out of college, is looking for a job and hasn't found one, they can stay on your family health insurance plan until age 26. The Republicans want to repeal that, leaving more and more young people, millions across America, vulnerable without the protection of health insurance. When it comes to Medicare Prescription Part D, seniors, because of the so-called donut hole, were paying sums out of their own savings, their meager savings, and out of their own pocket for prescription drugs. Obamacare filled that donut hole and gives those seniors more peace of mind when it comes to prescription drugs. The Republicans want to repeal that help for our senior citizens. And finally, they want to repeal the insurance exchanges. Today, every member of Congress who uses the health insurance available to us as senators and congressmen are part of the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program. Each year, senators, Republicans and Democrats, have an opportunity under an insurance exchange to pick the plan best for their family. That privilege is something we appreciate and want to make available for everyone across America. That's what Obamacare does. And the Republicans want to repeal it. Republican senators want to keep using the insurance exchange for their families and their benefit. They don't want to extend it to other families across America. That's what repeal of Obamacare would do. Those are the specifics. And for Senator McConnell to come to the floor and challenge those of us who voted for Obamacare as to whether we still stand by it, I do. Is it perfect? Of course not. There are changes that can be made to this law and should be made, but in a constructive and positive fashion. This is not just about the peace of mind of people, families and businesses and others when it comes to health insurance. It's about our deficit. If we took the Republican approach of doing nothing when it comes to the costs of health care, sadly, we are condemning ourselves to deficits as far as the eye can see. 60% of our deficits and looming national debt relates to the increased cost of health care. If we took the Republican approach of doing nothing, ultimately it would mean that deficit, those debts, would be even larger for future generations. So Obamacare is a step in the right direction. Finally, Mr. President, let me say, I understand what's going on now with several members of the Senate Republican caucus who want to take to the floor and argue that we should shut down the government if it means funding Obamacare. I think they're wrong on the merits. They're wrong politically. When both Wall Street Journal and even Karl Rove admonished them not to take this suicidal strategy, I think they're right. It's a strategy which is not appealing to anybody across America except a handful of extremists. Those who are independents and others believe that funding our government is a basic responsibility of the House and the Senate. It is important that we accept that responsibility. Standing up to make a speech on your beliefs on the floor is certainly every senator's right. But let us get on with the business of government. We should vote today on this motion to proceed instead of wasting an entire day and into tomorrow. If we can get bipartisan consent, we could come to that motion quickly. The sooner we satisfy America that we are not going to shut down the government, the better it will be for our economy to continue to grow and create jobs. Mr. President, I'm going to yield the floor and ask the time that I've just used be taken off the majority time under morning business to follow a little later this morning.
Yeah, without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President.
The senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
We are not on a quorum.
Okay. Mr. President, I rise today to talk about the economy generally and the negative effect that President Obama's policies are having on the economy and its health, and in particular on middle-class families. And I don't think you have to look very far to see that impact. In fact, this economy, which is growing at a very sluggish rate, it's the slowest rate, literally, I should say the slowest recovery, literally, in 50 years. In other words, the economy, in terms of coming out of a recession that we had a few years ago, is recovering at a slower rate than at any time, any recession in the past 50 years. The labor participation rate, in other words, the number of people in the workforce today, is at a lower level, percentage-wise, than it has been in 35 years. You have to go back to the administration of Jimmy Carter to find a time when the labor participation rate was at a lower level than it is today. And in fact, in the last year, of the jobs that have been created, 60% of those jobs are part-time jobs. We're not creating full-time jobs, we're creating part-time jobs, meaning that American workers are having to work more than one job to make ends meet and are having lower take-home pay. In fact, the take-home pay, the average household income is down since the president took office by about $4,000. So you've got lower take-home pay, fewer jobs, at least fewer full-time jobs, a slow, sluggish economy. And why is that the case? Well, frankly, it's because the policies that the president is putting in place is making it more expensive and more difficult to create jobs. And one of those policies, obviously, that's having a profound impact on the economy is the president's health care law, what we refer to as Obamacare. And since that bill was debated, going way back many years ago in the committees in the House and the Senate, a number of my colleagues and I have been raising concerns about the impact that it would have. For 4 years, we have warned about the negative effects, like increased premiums, which we're now seeing is actually the case. Reductions in jobs, fewer jobs. You've got fewer jobs being created out there. More and more businesses are saying the reason they're not hiring people, the reason that they're reducing their workforce is because of the mandates, the requirements, the uncertainty associated with Obamacare. People losing access to health care that they like and were promised that they'd be able to keep. But for 4 years, this president and his administration have looked the other way. Today it seems that even the organizations that strongly supported the health care changes are coming to terms with their impact. In fact, in 2009, the Cleveland Clinic hosted President Obama during the height of his sales pitch to the American people. That same Cleveland Clinic last week announced plans to cut some of its 44,000 employees because of Obamacare. The Cleveland Clinic is the largest employer in Cleveland and the second largest employer in Ohio. It is a premier hospital and medical research center that's now paying for the consequences of Obamacare. Mr. President, the Cleveland Clinic isn't the only company cutting jobs or wages in order to deal with increased costs due to Obamacare. According to Investors Business Daily, more than 250 employers have cut jobs or slashed hours as a direct result of Obamacare's high costs and job-killing regulations. And that really shouldn't come as any surprise when a 2,700-page law has already yielded 20,000 pages of regulations. Democrats overpromised on Obamacare, and now their signature piece of legislation is under-delivering. Turns out, if you like your health care plan, you don't necessarily get to keep it. Just ask employees at GE or at IBM or at UPS or at Walgreens or at Home Depot. Not only has Obamacare failed to make health care more affordable, but family premiums have actually jumped by more than $2,500 since Obamacare became law. According to the Chamber of Commerce, nearly 3 in 4 small businesses plan to fire workers or cut hours as a result of Obamacare. All of these negative effects are shaping public opinion of this law. Obamacare continues to be a gut punch to middle-class families who are already struggling, and public opinion is at an all-time low. In a recent NBC Wall Street Journal poll, only 12% of Americans believe the Democrats' signature law will have a positive effect on their families. And according to a recent CNN ORC International poll, nearly 60% of Americans now say they oppose Obamacare, which is up 17% since January. Americans are opposing this law for good reasons. There is a CMS actuary report that says health care costs are going to rise by $621 billion. And just yesterday, Forbes published an article, and the title of the article was Obamacare will increase health spending by $7,450 for a typical family of 4. By taking information from the nonpartisan Medicare actuary report, which was published last week, Forbes concluded that Obamacare will boost health spending by roughly $621 billion above amounts that would have been spent without the law. By spreading across all American families, the increase in health spending between 2014 and 2022 will amount to $7,450 per family of 4. Now juxtapose that, Mr. President, against President Obama's promise that premiums will go down by $2,500 per family. A critical component of the health care law are the exchanges, which are scheduled to open for enrollment a mere 7 days from today. Yet it appears that the administration is unprepared yet again. In fact, recently the Congressional Research Service reviewed the administration's missed deadlines during the first 3 years of the health care law's implementation. As of May 31st, the administration has failed to meet a total of 41 out of 82, 50%, 41 out of 82, 50% of the law's deadlines. So it should be no surprise that these exchanges aren't ready, which I find particularly concerning given the amount of personal information Americans will be required to provide to the government in order to apply for Obamacare coverage through the exchanges. Personal data like Social Security numbers, household income, other tax return information is going to be entered into a federal data services hub. CMS recently signed a $1.2 billion contract with a British company to sort and evaluate exchange applications containing personal financial data. According to the New York Times, the company, and I quote, has little experience with the Department of Health and Human Services or the insurance marketplaces, end quote. Last year, congressional hearings uncovered that the same company exposed more than 120,000 federal thrift savings plan enrollees to identity theft when personal financial data, including Social Security numbers, were stolen from a compromised computer. This is not exactly a track record that inspires confidence. And just last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that a pricing glitch is affecting rollout of the exchange. This pricing glitch is producing wrong pricing information. To me, this is further evidence that Obamacare is not ready for prime time. Unfortunately for the American people, when it comes to Obamacare, the worst is yet to come. And, Mr. President, I would argue that it is time to give the economy, the American economy, middle-class families, middle-class workers, a break by permanently delaying the law for all Americans, not just a select few, some of the waivers that the President gives to his favored constituencies, but for all Americans so they're not subject to the harmful impact and harmful effects of this law. And, Mr. President, Obamacare is not the only of President Obama's policies that is hurting the middle class. President Obama's war on affordable energy is also driving up energy costs and destroying jobs. During his first presidential campaign, the President promised that under his energy policies, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Maybe people remember that statement, but he said that electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket if he were elected president. Well, unlike his campaign promises to lower health care premiums and allow families to keep their health care plans, this is one plan and one promise that the President has kept. Last week, the administration rolled out a new energy tax that will slash jobs, restrict access to abundant domestic energy, and make electricity rates skyrocket. When combined with other EPA regulations, the President's policies will destroy more than 500,000 jobs, cause a family of four to lose more than $1,000 in annual income, and increase electricity prices by 20%. These burdens hit middle and lower income families the hardest. These families pay a much higher percentage of their income on energy costs. Forcing these families to pay an additional $1,000 in energy costs each year reduces what they have available to buy a home, pay for their children's education, or simply make ends meet each month. Even union leaders have expressed concern that the new energy tax is going to have a harmful impact on them and on their families. The head of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers said that the tax will, and I quote, threaten economic growth and America's energy future, end quote. And I'd like to, Mr. President, if I might, include that particular article for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, the middle class has been hit hard by the Obama economy. Unemployment remains above 7%. Middle-class incomes have fallen, as I said, by over $3,000 since the President took office. And unfortunately, the President's health care and energy policies not only destroy jobs, but hit the middle class with higher health care and higher energy costs. It is time for Congress to act as a check to the President's agenda and to stop these policies before more hardworking families are further harmed. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The Republican whip.
Mr. President, until Obamacare was passed in 2010, virtually every major piece of legislation involving domestic reforms in this country has passed with solid bipartisan support, from Social Security to welfare reform, from Medicare to tax reform, from civil rights to No Child Left Behind. Presidents as different across the ideological spectrum as Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson, George W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, and Bill Clinton all understood that there's more to making sure that legislation succeeds than just jamming it through on a partisan line vote. Indeed, after the bill passes and it needs to be implemented, aren't you going to need that same sort of bipartisan support to see that the legislation is actually implemented and actually works for the benefit of the American people? But by contrast, during the health care debate in 2009 and 2010, President Obama did not seek any kind of genuine compromise with Republicans, but instead he chose to ram it through on a controversial party line vote, which has generated nothing but division and bitterness since this legislation was first passed. 4.5 years later, Obamacare is more unpopular than ever. One recent poll showed that 68% of American voters, including a majority of Democrats, are concerned about how the law will affect their health care coverage. Medicare recipients are worried about losing access to their current doctors. Middle-class families are worried about losing their existing insurance coverage. Young people are worried about seeing their premiums skyrocket. And people on Medicaid are worried that America's health care safety net is going to become even less effective at protecting the neediest and most vulnerable members of our society. Day after day, not a day passes that we don't read stories about doctors who are dropping patients because of Obamacare, or employers that are ending the existing health care coverage their employees have because of Obamacare, or businesses that are slashing full-time work into part-time work because of Obamacare, and states that are projecting a spike in the insurance premiums that their people will pay because of Obamacare in the individual market. Even the New York Times is now acknowledging that because of Obamacare, many insurers are significantly limiting the choices of doctors and hospitals available to consumers. So rather than expanded access to coverage, consumers are finding that their choices are even more limited under Obamacare.
The President's own Department of Health and Human Services has estimated that America already has a massive shortage of primary care doctors. Indeed, just to meet current needs, we'll have to add more than 15,000. As a senior official at the American Academy of Family Physicians recently told Bloomberg News, the shortfall of primary care access is not an insignificant problem, and it's going to get worse. That's bad news for all Americans, and it's especially bad news for Medicaid beneficiaries who already have a hard time finding providers who will accept their insurance. In my home state, 62% of primary care physicians aren't in a position to take any new Medicaid patients. That's because Medicaid pays them at a fraction of what private health insurance or even Medicare pays. And so many doctors simply can't afford to see new Medicaid patients. So here you have the irony, the terrible irony of a promise of coverage but no real access to a doctor. Now, most physicians in Texas believe that Medicaid is broken and should not be used as a mechanism to expand coverage, but rather as a last resort safety net program. Unfortunately, dumping millions of additional Americans into Medicaid without fixing it, by doing so, Obamacare will make our health care safety net even more fragile and even weaker. Meanwhile, the President's health care law continues to discourage job creation and hamper our economic recovery. If there's one thing we need more than anything else in this country, it is a stronger economy, because greater economic growth means more jobs and more opportunity. And those people who've simply given up looking for work because the economy is growing too slowly will begin to find work again. But as of last week, more than 300 different employers had cut work hours or jobs or otherwise shifted from full-time to part-time staff because of Obamacare, according to Investors Daily. The administration seems to realize this, and particularly the employer mandate is discouraging job creation and prompting many businesses to turn full-time jobs into part-time jobs. It's just common sense. Obamacare gives businesses a powerful financial incentive not to hire more than 49 workers. What else did we think would happen? If you hire more than 49 workers, that you have to pay a penalty, but if you go underneath that cap, you don't. In early July, the administration unilaterally delayed enforcement of the employer mandate, recognizing this phenomenon of full-time work shifting to part-time work. On the very same day, it announced that it would not be verifying taxpayer eligibility for Obamacare premium support until 2015, even though the subsidies began flowing in 2014. So what this means is that people will qualify for taxpayer subsidies for their health care, even though the federal government will not be verifying that information for a year. What do we expect to happen? Well, I think one reasonable prediction is there will be massive fraud in the program. Of course, we know that the President, again, tried to go it alone and do this unilaterally without congressional action, and, of course, without constitutional authority. If there's one question my constituents asked me back in Texas is, how can the President keep ignoring the law? How can he keep issuing waivers or delaying the implementation of laws that Congress has passed? My only answer to them is Congress can pass the laws, but the Constitution gives the President the authority, the sole authority in the executive branch, the sole authority to enforce them. And when the Attorney General and the executive branch refuse to enforce the laws, their only remedy is really at the ballot box and possibly lawsuits filed by outside groups that may take many years to be resolved. It's enormously frustrating to them, and they worry that our whole constitutional framework is being undermined by the administration and this White House selectively deciding which laws it's going to enforce and which it's not. So the President's basically saying Obamacare means whatever I want it to mean. He's showing contempt for the rule of law and contempt for the separation of powers and our constitutional framework. And just look at the IRS. America's tax collection agency is in shambles due to the scandals that we all know way too much about. Well, unfortunately, this same organization is going to be the one that actually helps to implement Obamacare. And it will issue tax subsidies through the federal exchanges, even though the law makes clear that only state exchanges qualify for these subsidies. Americans are concerned also about how Obamacare will affect their privacy rights. After all, the health care exchanges are scheduled to open exactly 1 week from today, but there hadn't been adequate time to even test the data security system. Meanwhile, according to the Wall Street Journal, the government software can't reliably determine how much people need to pay for coverage. Not quite ready for prime time. Finally, there's the issue of fraud. I mentioned that a moment ago. The Obamacare subsidies start next year, but the government won't actually be verifying it until 2015. In other words, the President is effectively inviting people to game the system without fear of consequences. Mr. President, the only way to effectively stop Obamacare is to dismantle it entirely. That's why I strongly support the House bill that would defund Obamacare and save the American people from this public policy train wreck. My colleagues and I stand ready to work with the President on smart, patient-centered health care reforms that will actually reduce costs and improve access. But we refuse to help him salvage a law that has proven to be so unaffordable, unworkable, and so completely at odds with what the American people were told the law would do when this bill was passed. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. The senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this morning on coming in, I found the morning's copy of Politico with the headline, front page, Obamacare, one blow after another, with a picture of a pill bottle there, and it says promises versus reality. Just going to read a little bit of the way this article begins. The Obamacare that consumers will finally be able to sign up for next week is a long way from the health plan President Obama first pitched to the nation. Millions of low-income Americans won't receive coverage. Many workers at small businesses won't get a choice of insurance plans right away. Large employers won't need to provide insurance for another day, for another year. Far more states than expected won't run their own insurance marketplaces, and a growing number of workers won't get to keep their employer-provided coverage. So what's the President going to do about it? He made all the pitches, he made all the promises, and the American people found out it's not true. So today, President Obama is going to turn one more time to his so-called Secretary of Explaining Stuff to try to sell his health care law. The President and former President Bill Clinton will be holding a pep rally to try to convince people to sign up for health insurance in the new exchanges that open 1 week from today. This health care law was supposed to be the signature achievement of the Obama presidency. Why does the President need to call for backup to explain it? It was supposed to be overwhelmingly popular by now. Why does the Obama administration need reinforcements to sell it? Maybe because there are new polls out every day showing that the new law is more unpopular than ever. In an NBC poll, only 31% of people said that the President's health care law was a good idea. CNN found that 57% opposed most or all of the proposals in the law. Washington Democrats have been spinning their hardest, but the American people know that the health care law is unaffordable, it is unworkable, and it is very, very unpopular. Now, the last time Bill Clinton took to the stage to sell the health care law was about 3 weeks ago. Here was the Washington Post headline on that speech. It said, Clinton on the stump for health care law. Obama has dispatched ex-president to drum up support as crucial stage nears. Bill Clinton spoke for 50 minutes. He repeated a lot of the same old broken promises about what the law will do. He also gave the same old tired excuses for why it will fall short. He said there might be some glitches, there might be some unanticipated issues, but there were simple fixes, he said, to all of these. In 50 minutes, nearly an hour of talking, what Bill Clinton didn't do, what he didn't do, was honestly and seriously talk about the real problems with the Obama health care law. He never spoke directly to the American people who will be hurt by the law. So when Bill Clinton takes to the stage again today, I hope he will finally talk to some of those folks. For starters, he should speak to the workers who've had their work hours cut because of the law, and it is a direct hit to their paychecks. That's what's happening all across the country. Towns, counties, school districts have had to cut back hours of their workers. They need to keep more employees at a part-time status to reduce the burdens and the expenses of the health care law. They're limiting the hours they can pay bus drivers, librarians, coaches, substitute teachers, and other middle-class workers. More than 250 different employers across the country have had to take steps to reduce the burden of the President's health care law. President Obama owes part-time workers an explanation, and he owes them an apology. And if he won't do it, Bill Clinton should. The last time he spoke, President Clinton failed to mention the serious economic consequences of the law. The Obama administration did the same thing. They said they were only anecdotal evidence. Well, the heads of 3 major labor unions happen to disagree with the president. They sent out a letter recently to Democrats in Congress that warned about the damage that the health care law is doing to their care and to their paychecks. They wrote that the health care law, quote, will shatter not only our hard-earned health benefits, but destroy the foundation of the 40-hour work week that is the backbone of the American middle class. Even the president's strongest supporters are being hurt by his health care law. They're getting hit in their paychecks, and they're getting hit hard. I believe President Obama owes union members an explanation, and if he won't do it, Bill Clinton should. Those union leaders are also upset that a lot of the generous health care plans that they have had will have to be cut because of the law. They said the, quote, unintended consequences of the health care law are severe and that perverse incentives are already creating nightmare scenarios. That's from the unions. But it's not just the unions. Walgreens, Home Depot, IBM, Sears, Darden Restaurants, one company after another has had to make changes to their insurance plans under the Obama health care law. President Obama owes those middle-class workers an explanation, and he owes them an apology. And if he won't do it today, Bill Clinton should. The next group that President Clinton should talk to are the spouses who are losing their insurance coverage. The University of Virginia recently announced plans to drop spousal coverage for some of its employees. The school said it was the president's health care law, and it would add $7.3 million to the cost of its health plan in 2014. In a recent memo to employees, the shipping company UPS said that it also plans to exclude 15,000 spouses from its insurance plan. The company, of course, cited the health care law as the top reason for this switch. It said the increased expenses the government mandates have made it too difficult to keep offering the benefit. So just like the University of Virginia, if a worker's husband or wife can get insurance from their other employer, then UPS won't be covering them. President Obama owes those spouses an explanation, and if he won't do it, Bill Clinton should. Finally, I hope that President Clinton will be honest and speak directly to young people who are going to see their insurance premiums skyrocket. The health care law needs healthy young people to sign up for these exchanges in record numbers, or the whole thing will collapse. That's what's at stake for the Obama administration. So they're spending millions of dollars in advertising to convince young, healthy people to buy expensive, Washington-approved insurance. The Los Angeles Times ran a headline over the weekend. Hollywood plays key role for health law. White House counts on the entertainment industry to promote its plan, especially to young people. Hollywood celebrities and Bill Clinton trying to convince young people to sign up. Many of those young people will be paying more, and they're buying coverage that they may not need, and they really may not be right for them. But they have to do it. They have to do it to help subsidize insurance for older individuals. And at the same time, these young people can't find a job. They can't get full-time work. Why? Well, a lot because of the perverse incentives of the health care law. President Obama owes those young people an explanation and an apology. And if he won't do it, Bill Clinton should. The American people deserve more than sound bites and talking points and excuses. They deserve better than what they've gotten under this terrible health care law. A few months ago, the White House saw that its employer mandate was a bad idea, so delayed the mandate for a year. Republicans think that all Americans deserve a delay. There are real problems with this health care law, Mr. President. There are a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of unintended consequences, and a lot of ways that the law can do more harm than good for middle-class Americans. We should delay the law permanently and work out a better replacement that actually reforms health care the right way. The American people wanted health care reform. They wanted the care they need from a doctor they choose at a lower cost. And as the polls are showing, the American people know that the Obama health care law didn't give them what they asked for. President Obama failed to keep his promises, and he's failed at changing the public's opinion. So now he's going to be Bill Clinton's warm-up act in a last-ditch sales job. Well, what former President Clinton should do is talk to the American people who President Obama has ignored. And you only have to look at yesterday's New York Times front page, lower premiums to come at cost of fewer choices, impact of health care law. In new plans, insurance often leave out many providers. The President said, if you like what you have, you can keep it. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Even the California plan that the President touts, when you take a look at what is offered there in the insurance exchanges, the program, the network, the new network for thousands and thousands of people, tens of thousands of doctors across the state, does not include the 5 medical centers of the University of California or the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center near Beverly Hills. There's a furor in New Hampshire, excluding 10 of the state's 26 hospitals from health plans that it will sell through the insurance exchange. So, Mr. President, as I prepare to yield the floor, I think it is time for the President to admit that the health care law is terribly flawed. Promise after promise has been broken, and it is time for Democrats and Republicans to work together to give the American public the care that they need and deserve. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Just want to make a few points this morning and say what I think is on many Americans' minds. There is a reason why the favorability rating of Congress is at 10% or less, and that is because the middle class of this country, the vast majority of our people, are hurting. They're worried about what kind of future their kids are going to have, and they look at Washington and they ask, what is going on? Our Republican friends in the House on 42 separate occasions attempted to defund Obamacare. And on 42 separate occasions, they failed. There was a presidential election in which this issue of whether we expand health care to another 20 million Americans, whether we end the obscenity of pre-existing conditions where people who have had serious health problems are denied health care, whether we end that, whether we make sure that kids 26 years of age or younger are on their parents' health insurance plan, whether we do more for disease prevention, etc. That was debated very heavily in the presidential election. And guess what? The Republican candidate who wanted to defund Obamacare lost that election. And now, quite incredibly, what the Republicans are saying is, yeah, we failed 42 times, we lost the presidential election, but now we are prepared to shut down the entire United States government unless we end this legislation. It's not going to happen. They're not going to end Obamacare. Surely we need to improve it. I myself believe we need a Medicare for All single-payer program. And let's discuss how we can improve the program, how we can join the rest of the industrialized world, guaranteeing health care to all people as a right of citizenship, how we end the absurdity of, in this country, spending twice as much per person on health care as do the people of any other country. My Republican friends really have nothing to offer on this issue. 48 million Americans have no health insurance. What are their ideas? They don't exist. But the point here is that no matter what your view may be about Obamacare, it is incredibly irresponsible and reckless and makes this country look incredibly foolish to the rest of the world that they are prepared to shut down the government unless they get their way on this issue. But most importantly, all over America, while people are struggling, they're seeing this absurd debate about Republican efforts to shut down the government unless they defund Medicare. And people are saying, what about us? While you have this silly political fight, what are you doing to improve our lives? What are you doing to address the fundamental economic realities in this country? And that is that the middle class of this great country is disappearing. Poverty is now, more people are now living in poverty than at any time in history, 46.5 million. And the gap between the very, very wealthy and everybody else is growing wider. So we have this unbelievable economic situation where, while the vast majority of Americans have seen a decline in their standard of living, people on top are doing phenomenally well. Mr. President, there was just a report came out last week from the Census Bureau, quite incredible, that tells us that in terms of median family income, that family right in the middle of American society now is earning less income than they did 24 years ago. Despite all of the increases in productivity, despite all of the new technology, that family in the middle is earning less income than 24 years ago. Typical middle-class family has seen its income go down by more than $5,000 since 1999 after adjusting for inflation, $5,000. Average male worker earns $283 less last year than he did 44 years ago. Average female worker earns $1,700 less last year than she did in 2007. Meanwhile, people on top do incredibly well. Between 2009 and 2012, 95% of all new income went to the top 1%, and we now have by far the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth. So where we are is that we have a middle class that is disappearing, poverty very, very high, people on top doing phenomenally well, 48 million Americans without any health insurance, and the Republican solution to this plan is to bring down the government unless they can defund Obamacare. Mr. President, I think it is important for the American people to understand, and it is not discussed enough here on the floor of the Senate or in the media, what the long-term plan of the Republican Party is. Is it simply to defund Obamacare? No, it is not. Is it simply to shut down the government? No, it is not. It is important to understand what this right-wing extremist ideology is all about and to have a serious discussion as to whether or not the American people want to go forward in that direction, which is a lot more than just defunding Obamacare or shutting down the government. Mr. President, the Texas Republican Party every year publishes a platform. And what's interesting about it is not just that Texas is a very large state, conservative state, but the ideas that emanate from Texas often become mainstream in the Republican Party a few years later. So I think it's important to understand what long-term the Republican Party wants to do. And let me just tell you some of the planks, some of the positions that were in the Republican Party platform in 2012 so that we understand that what is being discussed today, some cuts in Social Security, voucherization of Medicare, massive cuts in food stamps, that's not the end game. That's the beginning of the game. This is from the 2012 Texas Republican Party platform. And let me quote, I'm quoting, "We support an immediate and orderly transition to a system of private pensions based on the concept of individual retirement accounts and gradually phasing out the Social Security tax." End of quote. What that means, and I give them credit for being upfront and straightforward about the issue, that is ending Social Security. That's it. Social Security has been the most effective and successful federal program in modern American history. It's taken tens and tens of millions of seniors out of poverty. And basically, what the Texas Republican Party is saying, we don't want to just cut Social Security. Many people want to do that. We want to end it. And if you are old, what happens to you when you're 75 years of age and you have no income coming in? Well, it's not their worry. Furthermore, and I quote, and I want every veteran, I speak now as chairman of the Veterans Committee, I want every veteran in America to understand long-term, not today, long-term goals. This is from 2012 Texas Republican Party platform. Quote, "We support the privatization of veterans' health care." End of quote. In other words, we have some 6 million veterans today who are receiving good quality health care at the VA. I myself think we should expand the program. At least 1 million veterans out there are not getting, or uninsured right now, who could utilize VA health care. I myself think that the eligibility requirements are too stringent. We should bring more people into the system. But our Republican friends in Texas, and again, this is becoming mainstream, they want to end veterans' health care. Next point that I quote, "We support," quote, "we support abolishing all federal agencies whose activities are not specifically enumerated in the Constitution, including the Department of Education and Energy." End of quote. Well, the vast majority of people in the scientific community who study global warming thinks that global warming is a crisis today. It's only going to get worse. And the only way we deal with that issue is having a concrete policy. They want to abolish the Department of Education. Millions of young people all over this country cannot afford the cost of college today. Low-income kids, middle-class kids are struggling educationally all over this country. They want to abolish the Department of Education. Furthermore, and I quote, "We oppose mandatory kindergarten." End of quote. One of the great crises in this country today is the child care crisis of early childhood education. Working families in Vermont and all over this country having a hard time getting affordable child care. They want to, quote, "We oppose mandatory kindergarten." End of quote. Quote, "We believe the Environmental Protection Agency should be abolished." End of quote. Not cut, abolished. So we can go back to the days when companies could throw their garbage into our rivers and our streams, pollute the air, make kids sick, and get away with it with impunity because there's nobody there saying it is against the law. Nobody can enforce the law. They want to abolish the Environmental Protection Agency and endanger the health and well-being of kids and Americans all over this country. Furthermore, and I quote, "We recommend repeal of the 16th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution with the goal of abolishing the IRS and replacing it with a national sales tax collected by the states." End of quote. What does that mean? It means the ending of any form of progressive taxation. As I pointed out earlier, the wealthiest people in this country are doing phenomenally well. The middle class is disappearing. What that means is you end the ability to ask the wealthiest people in this country to start paying their fair share of taxes, you put the tax burden on the middle class and working families, which of course is what they want to do. Lower taxes for the rich, raise it for the middle class and working families. Quote unquote, we favor abolishing the capital gains tax and the estate tax. Well, the estate tax applies to the very, very richest people in this country. Why not abolish it? Sure. And put the burden of taxation on working families. And here's one that I think many Americans don't fully appreciate where they're coming from. Mr. President, I hope very much that this Congress will begin to address the huge crisis facing tens of millions of workers who are today working for starvation wages. Bottom line is that one of the reasons that poverty in America is increasing is that people can't make it on $7.25, $8, $9 an hour. We have got to raise the minimum wage. It's now $7.25 nationally. Got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. Now, there can be an honest debate about how much higher the minimum wage should go. I understand it. I think that California has recently raised it to $10 an hour. The state of Washington has it higher. My own state of Vermont has it higher than $7.25. We can have that debate. But this is what everybody in America should understand. In terms of the debate with my Republican colleagues, that debate will not be how high we raise the minimum wage above $7.25. This is what the Texas Republican Party platform in 2010 says, quote, we believe the minimum wage should be repealed. Let me repeat it. We believe the minimum wage law should be repealed, end of quote. And it turns out that more and more of my colleagues here in the Senate have been upfront about that. Now, what does that mean in the real world? What it means in those areas of our country where unemployment is extremely high and you're going to have a lot of competition for jobs, what employers will say is, you know what, you want to work? Tell you what, we're going to give you $3.50 an hour. And if you don't want that, that's all right. I got that person over there who's prepared to take that job. Because I got a line of people out there who are unemployed, who are prepared to work for any wage, and we no longer are going to have a floor on wages in America. That is what the Texas Republican Party believes. That is what more and more of my colleagues believe. So, Mr. President, the point that I am making this morning is that the fight we are having right now over shutting down the government, the debate that I'm sure will ensue shortly after about whether or not we raise the debt ceiling and whether or not, for the first time in the history of the United States, we don't pay our bills, causing not only a national financial crisis but an international financial crisis. All of these issues are related to something that is much, much larger, and that is the transformation of American society in a radically different way than it is today. And what my Republican colleagues, almost without exception, want to do now is take us back into the 1920s, where working people had virtually no protection at all on the job, no minimum wage, no job safety protection, where Social Security didn't exist, where Medicare didn't exist, so that if you were old and you got sick, well, your future was not very bright. If you're poor and you got sick, you had nothing. They want to take us back to a time when a handful of corporations and wealthy people controlled the economic and political life of this nation. I do not believe that is where the American people want to go. I believe that the American people want us to start focusing on issues of relevance to them, and that is the understanding that we need to create millions of decent-paying jobs by, among other approaches, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. The need to create jobs by making this country more energy efficient so we can lower fuel bills and cut back on greenhouse gas emissions. What the American people want us to do is focus on the crisis of low wages in this country, to raise the minimum wage, They want us to make college education more affordable. They want us to end these horrendous loopholes that enable major multinational corporations, in some cases, to pay nothing in federal taxes. So, Mr. President, I think the time is long overdue for this Congress to start representing the working families of this country, the middle class of this country, and not simply wealthy campaign contributors. And with that, Mr. President, I would